mother-in-law, tortures pregnant wife, but the millionaire stands behind, witnessing it all. They said marrying into a wealthy family would solve all of Rosalie's problems. They promised her a fairy tale life, marked by glittering jewels and lavish parties. But behind the polished gates of the Harrington estate, an unsettling darkness crept in. Her mother-in-law, Clara Harrington, had a reputation that whispered through high society tea rooms, a woman of unbreakable pride and chilling authority. When Rosalie discovers she's pregnant, what should be a joyful moment quickly turns into a ruthless battleground. Forced to endure Clara's torment, Rosalie isn't sure if her silent millionaire husband Adrian truly cares, or if he's complicit in it all. Rosalie Jenkins grew up in the modest suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. Her home was a small one-story house where the evening air always smelled of magnolias. She had never craved a lavish lifestyle. She was content with quiet nights in, a library's worth of novels, and her mother's homemade pies. Life was simple until she met Adrian Harrington at a local gala she had managed to attend through a friend's invitation. Adrian was magnetic. He was everything Rosalie was not: bold, affluent, worldly. A millionaire at 30, he'd already taken the business world by storm, thanks to his family's generations-old shipping empire. Though Adrian was charming, it wasn't his wealth that drew Rosalie in. It was the unexpected kindness in his eyes. She saw in him a warmth that all his polish and sophistication couldn't conceal. Before she knew it, they were in a whirlwind courtship that culminated in a grand wedding at the Harrington family estate. The Harrington estate was a sprawling mansion perched on acres of meticulously groomed gardens. Adorned with antique tapestries and marble floors, it was the seat of a long lineage that prided itself on tradition. At the center of this tradition stood Clara Harrington, Adrian's imposing mother. She had sharp cheekbones, a regal bearing, and eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared to cross her threshold. On Rosalie's wedding day, Clara's face was masked in a carefully practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Even at the wedding, small hints of tension slipped through the festivities. Rosalie sensed the disapproval emanating from Clara's glances. She'd overhear half-whispered comments from Clara's friends, concerns about Rosalie's lack of pedigree and humble background. Rosalie tried to focus on the euphoria of her marriage, but a lingering dread tightened in her chest every time she locked eyes with Clara. After the ceremony, Rosalie's mother, Margaret Jenkins, confided that she too had caught Clara's pointed stares throughout the event. Margaret squeezed Rosalie's hands, telling her, "You're marrying Adrian, not his mother. You'll be just fine." Rosalie nodded, wanting so desperately to believe it was true. When the newlyweds left for their 2-week honeymoon in the south of France, they experienced something close to bliss. Strolling hand in hand through the narrow streets of Cannes, sailing along the coastline, and sharing midnight conversations beneath the stars made Rosalie believe she'd found her dream. Adrian seemed genuinely attentive, curious about her thoughts, her feelings, and her dreams. In those moments, Rosalie found solace in the fact that, despite Clara's disapproval, Adrian's love felt steadfast. Yet, upon returning to the estate, the bright memories of the honeymoon began to dim. Adrian's business demanded more of his time. He often left early for meetings and returned late at night, exhaustion etched into his features. Rosalie was left to navigate her new home under Clara's watchful eye. The older woman wasted no time setting down rules that Rosalie found stifling. Breakfast in the grand dining hall at exactly 7 a.m. Luncheons with the women of the family's social circle every Tuesday. Absolutely no frivolous guests allowed without prior approval. All the while, Clara's eyes tracked Rosalie's every movement like a hawk circling its prey. During one dinner, Clara made a show of asking about Rosalie's upbringing. The inquiry sounded pleasant enough, but her tone was laced with condescension. "So Margaret was a housekeeper?" she asked, glancing at Rosalie over her wine-glass. Rosalie felt a hot flush creeping up her cheeks. She gripped her fork a little tighter and mustered a smile. explaining that her mother did domestic work to support the family after her father passed. Clara's response was a simple, "How honourable," but the words dripped with disdain. Alarm bells rang softly in Rosalie's mind. Still, she didn't want to let these tensions overshadow her newlywed happiness. Adrian was by her side, most of the time. She convinced herself that with patience, maybe she could gain Clara's acceptance. There had to be some kindness beneath her frigid exterior, but what Rosalie could not fathom was just how deeply Clara's resentment ran, or the lengths to which Adrian's mother would go when she discovered Rosalie was expecting a child. The illusions of marital bliss were about to splinter, and Rosalie would soon find herself standing in the crosshairs of a woman who believed no one was good enough for her precious son. It happened on a Saturday morning. The sky outside was painted in pastel hues of pink and orange, sunlight filtering in through the grand windows overlooking the rose garden. Rosalie had been feeling nauseous for weeks. She had just chalked it up to the stress of adjusting to her new lifestyle and her new mother-in-law's demands. But the faint suspicion in her heart nudged her to see the family doctor, discreetly of course. She didn't want to give Clara any new ammunition to use against her. When the doctor confirmed her pregnancy, Rosalie felt an ecstatic rush of warmth flood her body. She was carrying Adrian's child, a symbol of their love and a new reason to believe in a bright future. She nearly flew back to the estate, eager to share the news with her husband. Adrian was due to return from a business meeting in New York that evening, and she wanted his to be the first ear to hear about the baby. But at the estate, Rosalie's excitement was cut short. She found Clara in the sitting room, casually flipping through a magazine. Almost as if possessed by her good news, Rosalie couldn't resist telling Clara first, her face aglow with happiness. "Mother Harrington," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement, "I just came from the doctor. Adrian and I are going to have a baby." Clara's reaction was not what Rosalie had imagined in her mind's rosy fantasies. The older woman's brow furrowed, and a look of cold calculation replaced any semblance of joy. "Are you quite sure, my dear?" was all she said. No congratulations, no gentle hug, no tears of happiness for a new life about to join the Harrington family. Instead, Clara cast a critical eye at Rosalie's stomach, as though inspecting an object of questionable quality. She rose from her chair and walked away without another word. Rosalie stood rooted, her heart pounding. She felt a sting of tears at the corners of her eyes. This was not how a pregnancy announcement was supposed to go. She swallowed the lump in her throat and decided to seek comfort in the solitude of the estate's library. Among the tall shelves of ancient books, she tried to quell her anxiety, reminding herself that Adrian would return soon. Adrian, who had seemed so caring and protective, would undoubtedly share her joy. That evening, when Adrian finally came home, Rosalie met him at the grand foyer. He looked tired, but there was no mistaking the flash of excitement in his eyes when she told him they were expecting. He pulled her into his arms, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "You've made me the happiest man in the world," and promised to shield her from anything that might harm her, especially Clara's sharp tongue. However, Rosalie soon discovered that words of protection meant very little if the storms were swirling within the same walls. Clara began making subtle, often insulting remarks about Rosalie's health, deriding her as overly sensitive or fragile. She'd question why Rosalie needed more rest than usual, calling her lazy behind Adrian's back. Whenever Adrian was present, Clara feigned politeness. She'd offer Rosalie special teas and vitamins, but it was all an act to maintain the veneer of family harmony. Things escalated one afternoon when Clara walked into the kitchen where Rosalie was helping the staff prepare dinner. In front of the entire staff, she openly belittled Rosalie's cooking skills. "You might want to be careful with those knives, Rosalie. We wouldn't want you harming the precious cargo you're carrying," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words were coated in scorn, aimed not just at Rosalie, but at her unborn child. The staff, devoted to the Harrington family for decades, exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen Clara act so openly hostile. They had known her as a demanding mistress, but rarely had they witnessed such targeted cruelty. One of the cooks, an elderly woman named Maria Lopez, discreetly wiped a tear from Rosalie's cheek. "I know it's hard," Maria whispered. "She wasn't always like this. But you must find your inner strength, dear." In that moment, Rosalie understood that her life inside the Harrington estate would be a long, lonely battle. Without Adrian to intervene daily, he was increasingly consumed by business expansions. Rosalie would have to face Clara's wrath mostly on her own, but for the sake of her baby, she vowed to stand firm. She believed a child could change hearts, even one as cold as Clara's. Surely, with time, grandmotherly love would awaken in Adrian's mother. Little did Rosalie realize the seeds of hope she was planting would be tested in ways she never anticipated. Clara, with her web of connections and her resolute determination, had only just begun to reveal how far she would go to maintain control over her family's legacy. The following weeks found Rosalie struggling with bouts of morning sickness and overwhelming fatigue. As her pregnancy progressed, so did Clara's silent campaign to undermine her. Rosalie often caught glimpses of whispered conversations between Clara and the staff. The older woman's lips pressed tight as she handed down some new instruction. The staff, though loyal to the Harrington name, showed compassion toward Rosalie in small gestures, slipping her ginger tea for nausea, offering a gentle word when Clara wasn't watching. One afternoon, while Adrian was away attending a board meeting, Rosalie decided to explore the estate. She'd grown up with a deep love of history, and the Harrington home, with its centuries-old architecture, intrigued her. She wandered through corridors adorned with oil paintings of stiff-lipped ancestors. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through ornate windows. The grandeur was palpable, yet a sense of unease clung to Rosalie as she entered areas Clara had explicitly told her were off-limits. She found herself drawn to a closed door at the far end of a little-used wing. Something about it seemed to beckon. With a moment's hesitation, Rosalie turned the handle. Inside lay an expansive, unoccupied bedroom, the furniture draped in white cloth. The atmosphere was heavy, as if harboring secrets long buried. She lifted one of the sheets to reveal a carved mahogany crib, its edges inlaid with gold filigree. A flicker of emotion tugged at her. Why would there be a nursery here? She wondered aloud. Startled by a rustle behind her, Rosalie spun around to see Clara standing in the doorway. Her face was pale as marble, her eyes dark pools of anger. "What are you doing in here?" Clara demanded, her voice dangerously calm. Rosalie stammered an explanation, saying she had just wandered in by accident. Clara narrowed her eyes, stepping forward with slow deliberation. "This room belonged to Adrian's younger brother, Michael," Clara said at last, her tone laced with bitterness. "He died before he was a year old. I don't like anyone coming in here. It's my private memory." Her words, though seemingly vulnerable, felt like an accusation. Rosalie felt her stomach twist in guilt, but something about Clara's reaction was off. There was no trace of maternal sorrow. Instead, the anger that emanated from Clara felt more protective than mournful, as though Rosalie had stumbled upon a hidden piece in a game she didn't know she was playing. When Clara demanded she leave and never speak of the room again, Rosalie nodded quickly and hurried out. Her heart pounded as she made her way back to the main corridor. In her room she tried to calm herself with deep breaths, her mind reeling. She recalled the carved crib in that lonely space, a reminder of a tragedy that might be fueling Clara's hostility. But part of her couldn't shake the sensation that there was more to the story, a reason Clara carried such darkness within her. That night, when Adrian returned, Rosalie felt a surge of relief. She wanted to tell him about the hidden nursery and Clara's alarming reaction. But at dinner, Clara was on her best behavior. She asked after Adrian's trip, listened to his stories about new investors, and even inquired about Rosalie's morning sickness with a veneer of concern. Adrian, exhausted but glad to see some semblance of normalcy, didn't suspect a thing. Later, in the privacy of their suite, Rosalie carefully broached the topic. Adrian grew distant when she mentioned the hidden nursery. "My mother doesn't like to talk about Michael," he said softly. "He died from a sudden illness. She took it terribly hard. I suppose it might explain why she's so protective now." Rosalie's eyes widened. Protective was not the word she would have chosen to describe Clara's behavior. Nevertheless, Adrian stroked her hair gently, assuring her she had nothing to worry about. But Rosalie's instincts told her otherwise. The darkness she sensed in Clara's eyes wasn't mere grief, it was something far more ominous. As she drifted off to sleep, she wondered if this old estate held more secrets that Clara was determined to keep buried. And she wondered if her unborn child somehow threatened the delicate balance of a fractured family's legacy. Rosalie's pregnancy advanced to the second trimester, bringing with it a small yet unmistakable bump. As her body changed, so did Clara's brand of malice. It wasn't always blatant insults or accusations. Sometimes it was the withdrawal of support she desperately needed. On cold mornings, the staff would receive instructions to keep the heating low in Rosalie's wing of the mansion, leaving her shivering in her room. Other times her meals arrived cold or late, as if lost in translation between Clara's orders and the kitchen staff. In the midst of this quiet torment, Rosalie tried to maintain her composure for Adrian's sake. Whenever she thought about confiding in him, she hesitated. Adrian was constantly traveling now, London, Singapore, Dubai, securing deals for a massive expansion of Harrington shipping. He would return home for only a couple of days before jetting off again, and each time he asked how she was faring, she'd see the exhaustion in his eyes and hear the quiver of concern in his voice. She couldn't bear to add more stress to his plate, especially knowing how carefully he tread around his imperious mother. One Sunday afternoon, Rosalie sat on a chaise lounge in the sunroom, trying to distract herself with an old copy of Jane Eyre. She felt the baby flutter, a sensation that brought a tired smile to her lips. At least she had this life growing inside her to keep her anchored. Just then Clara entered with a cup of tea. For a moment Rosalie felt hopeful. Perhaps Clara was finally extending an olive branch. "I've brought you some chamomile," Clara said, placing the teacup on the small table next to Rosalie. "It's good for nerves." Rosalie thanked her softly, taking a careful sip. But as the warm liquid slipped down her throat, an odd taste lingered on her tongue, bitter, metallic. She coughed, alarmed. "What's in this tea, Mother?" Clara's face remained impassive. "Just herbs," she said sweetly, though her eyes flashed with something cruel. "You should drink it all. It'll help calm you." A chill coursed through Rosalie. Instinctively, she set the teacup down, her mind racing. Could Clara be attempting something sinister, or was Rosalie's fear making her paranoid? The doubt gnawed at her. For the sake of the baby, she vowed to be more vigilant. She subtly avoided finishing the tea, pretending she'd lost her appetite. Clara's lips tightened in what might have been displeasure, but she said nothing. After a tense pause, she left the room. Rosalie's heart pounded. She needed to be sure she wasn't imagining things. She decided to pay a secret visit to the family doctor the next day under the guise of a routine prenatal checkup. She managed to slip out of the estate without drawing attention, thanks to a sympathetic driver who had worked for the Harringtons for years. At the doctor's office, she asked for tests on her blood work, and specifically mentioned feeling uneasy after drinking a tea prepared by Clara. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a fatherly demeanor, took her concerns seriously. He promised to rush the tests. For the next 2 days, Rosalie lived on edge, her mind filled with worst-case scenarios. When the results came back, the doctor reassured her. There were no toxins or harmful substances detected. "It might have been just a particularly bitter blend," he said gently. "Try not to stress too much. It's not good for your pregnancy." Relief washed over Rosalie, but it was tainted with guilt. Had she really believed Clara capable of harming her unborn grandchild? Still, the bitter aftertaste of that tea and the unsettling gleam in Clara's eyes made her cautious. She pledged to approach every interaction with Clara more carefully. In the meantime, Adrian's phone calls became her lifeline. Late at night, when he was in some distant hotel suite, He would call to ask about her day and the baby's progress. Rosalie noticed a new tension in his voice. He would mention how his mother had called him earlier, concerned about Rosalie's lack of rest or strange dietary habits. Adrian sounded confused, torn between the mother he'd idolized and the wife he adored. One night, feeling her loneliness overwhelm her, Rosalie almost spilled everything: Clara's coldness, the suspicious tea, the fear that overshadowed her every waking moment in that mansion. But she swallowed her confession. She knew Adrian was on the verge of finalizing a crucial deal that would elevate the Harrington empire to unprecedented heights. Stressing him with her worries now might compromise everything he'd worked for. Perhaps it was her own pride, or maybe it was a misplaced desire to prove her resilience, but she decided to bear the burden silently a little longer. What Rosalie didn't know was that Clara was systematically feeding Adrian half-truths, painting a picture of a fragile, emotional woman who couldn't handle the pressures of high society. Under the weight of these insinuations, Adrian started to question whether Rosalie's interpretations might be amplified by her pregnancy hormones. And all the while, Clara watched from the shadows, her plan to maintain control unfolding exactly as she intended. With every passing day, Clara's shrewd manipulations began to wedge a subtle distance between Adrian and Rosalie. He was still attentive in his own way, sending flowers when he travelled, calling every night, but Rosalie sensed a growing wariness in his voice when she described her day-to-day life at the estate. His typical response was a gentle suggestion like, "Try to rest more," or "Mother means well," as though he suspected Rosalie's emotional account of events was exaggerated. When Adrian returned from a particularly long trip to Dubai, the tension between husband and wife finally breached the surface. He arrived home to find Rosalie in tears, comforted by Maria Lopez, the cook. Upon seeing Adrian, Maria discreetly excused herself, leaving the couple alone in the small sitting room. Rosalie explained that Clara had forbidden her from attending an important charity luncheon, one that Rosalie had helped organize to raise funds for neonatal care at the local hospital. "She said I would embarrass the family," Rosalie whispered, her eyes red from crying. Adrian was silent for a moment, jaw clenched. "Mother told me you weren't feeling well, that the doctor advised you not to overexert yourself," he said carefully. "She only wanted to protect you and the baby." Rosalie's mouth dropped. "That's not true. The doctor said mild activity and public engagement are perfectly fine. Adrian, she's lying to you. You have to believe me." Her voice wavered, stricken with desperation. He reached for her hand, concern etched on his features. "I believe you, Rosie. But you have to understand, Mother might be overprotective because she lost Michael so young. She may be overstepping, but it's all coming from a place of fear." Tears welled up in Rosalie's eyes. It frustrated her that he continuously defended Clara's actions. Yes, losing a child would be devastating for any mother, but did it justify the cruel manipulations and emotional abuse Rosalie was enduring? As if on cue, Clara entered the room, carrying a stack of papers. "Adrian, I just got the final accounting details for the charitable trust," she said, before glancing at Rosalie with practiced concern. "Oh, my dear. Are you quite all right? I heard you were upset." She turned to Adrian. "I only wanted to prevent her from taking on too much stress in her condition." Adrian stood there, torn between the two women he loved. The air in the room felt suffocating as Clara smoothly painted a picture of herself as the ever-concerned mother, just trying to shield the fragile Rosalie from any harm. Rosalie felt an almost dizzying sense of helplessness. She watched Adrian's face, searching for a sign that he saw through the facade. Instead, he nodded, conceding that Clara might have been misguided, but well-intentioned. A crack formed in Rosalie's trust that day. She loved Adrian, but she could sense him slipping deeper into Clara's thrall of half-truths and manipulations. The mother-in-law she had tried to appease was sowing seeds of doubt between them, and Rosalie, pregnant and isolated, felt her self-confidence waver. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Rosalie couldn't sleep. She ran her hand over her belly, feeling the baby's reassuring kicks. In her heart, she vowed to protect her child from the family drama swirling around them. This baby was her only hope, a bright spark in the darkness. She prayed that once the baby arrived, it would melt Clara's frozen heart, forcing her to see reason. But unbeknownst to Rosalie, Clara had already begun to lay the groundwork for her next move. She had parted ways with her usual circle of friends and begun reaching out to more influential contacts. People like the renowned obstetrician Dr. Eleanor Reed, who had delivered the children of celebrities and aristocrats alike, including, in a moment of name-dropping that Clara relished, the daughter of Kris Jenner. Clara hinted at wanting only the best for her grandchild, while quietly planning to keep Rosalie under even tighter surveillance during the final months of pregnancy. If Rosalie thought the worst was over, she was dangerously mistaken. Clara's real game was just beginning to unfold, and the stakes were higher than ever. As Rosalie's belly grew, so did the tension in the Harrington household. Adrian was home for a rare stint of 2 consecutive weeks. He tried to juggle his mounting work responsibilities with spending time with Rosalie, attending obstetric appointments, and overseeing some estate renovations. During one of these rare moments of peace, he sat with Rosalie in the library, reading out sections of a baby name book. The warmth in his voice as he joked about silly names almost made Rosalie forget the hostility lurking in the mansion's corridors. But the reprieve was short-lived. One morning, Rosalie woke early to faint cries coming from somewhere in the estate. Following the sound, she found Clara in a small parlour room that doubled as a shrine to the family's past. A large portrait of a baby boy, presumably Michael, hung on the wall. Clara was seated before it, tears streaming down her usually imperious face. Swallowing her apprehension, Rosalie cautiously approached. "Mother Harrington, are you all right?" she ventured. Clara, startled, abruptly rose and wiped her tears. Her face hardened back into its familiar aloof expression. "Don't concern yourself," she said coldly. However, Rosalie, buoyed by the maternal instinct growing within her, pressed gently. "I know you miss him. I can't imagine what it must have been like to lose a child." For a fleeting moment, a crack appeared in Clara's armour. She turned her gaze to the painting. "Michael was supposed to be my miracle," she whispered. "He had a heart condition, one we didn't know about until it was too late. We were helpless." Rosalie felt her heart clench with empathy. "I'm so sorry," she offered, her voice trembling. Taking a step closer, she placed a hand on Clara's arm, hoping to bridge their divide through shared understanding. But the moment was swiftly shattered. Clara shrugged off Rosalie's hand as though burned. Her features twisted in anger. "Don't patronize me. You think you can waltz in with your common background and fix the Harrington family? You're a naive girl who got lucky." Rosalie staggered back as though physically struck. "I'm not trying to fix anything," she whispered, voice trembling with hurt. "I only want us to be a family." Clara let out a bitter laugh. "Family? You know nothing. Adrian's father left us years ago. Not that it matters. All that matters is protecting the Harrington name. Do you think your child will be safe if you're too weak to handle the pressures here?" Tears of hurt and frustration welled in Rosalie's eyes. She placed a protective hand over her belly. "I'm strong enough," she managed. "And Adrian loves me. He'll stand by me." Clara's lip curled in a sneer. "We shall see." With that, she swept out of the room, leaving Rosalie shaken to the core. A few hours later, Rosalie found the courage to recount the incident to Adrian. He listened, his brows furrowed with concern. "I'll talk to her," he said eventually. But when he did confront Clara, she vehemently denied speaking so harshly, claiming Rosalie had twisted her words out of anxiety. By the time Adrian returned to Rosalie, he looked worn and confused. "She says she's worried about you." "That you're imagining slights," he told Rosalie softly. "This is exactly why I wanted you to rest. The stress isn't good for the baby." In that moment, the realization hit Rosalie like a blow. No matter what Clara did or said, she would spin the narrative to her advantage, and Adrian would be caught in the middle, unsure whom to believe. The seeds of doubt Clara planted were taking root. That night, Rosalie found herself unable to sleep, haunted by the memory of Clara's tears and her scathing words. She thought of that lonely nursery she'd found, the dust-covered crib that once held Michael. She pictured the heartbreak Clara must have endured. Could it be that her cruelty was born from deep-seated fear and trauma? Or was it something more calculating, an absolute refusal to relinquish control of her family's future? Regardless of the cause, Rosalie knew she had to be vigilant. In Clara's eyes, she was an interloper, a threat to the rigid hold Clara had on Adrian and the Harrington legacy. And if Clara's past tragedy was fueling her present actions, Rosalie feared it might only escalate as her due date approached. When Rosalie entered her third trimester, Clara shifted tactics yet again. She insisted on supervising Rosalie's daily routine, her meals, her exercise regimen, even her visits to the doctor. At first, Adrian was relieved. "She's just looking out for you," he told Rosalie. "Let her help. Maybe it's her way of making amends." But Rosalie saw the truth lurking behind Clara's sudden helpfulness. Every action was laced with a subtle control. Clara appointed Dr. Eleanor Reed, the high-profile obstetrician with an impressive roster of celebrity clients, to take over Rosalie's prenatal care. To Rosalie's dismay, Clara insisted on being present for every appointment. During these visits, Clara would speak over Rosalie, voicing concerns and detailing symptoms Rosalie didn't even have. Dr. Reed, dazzled by the Harrington name and Clara's high society ties, paid more attention to Clara's narrative than to Rosalie's quiet protests. The final straw came when Dr. Reed suggested bed rest, citing stress as a potential risk factor for premature labor. Rosalie felt a wave of panic. Being confined to bed would render her even more vulnerable to Clara's whims. She tried to argue that she felt fine, that her previous doctor had approved moderate activity, but Dr. Reed waved away her protests. "Your mother-in-law has expressed real concerns, my dear. We must prioritize the well-being of your child," she said in a patronizing tone. That evening, Rosalie confronted Adrian, begging him to listen. "I don't need bed rest," she insisted. "The only thing causing me stress is your mother." Adrian sighed, rubbing his temples. "Rosie, I'm not a doctor. If Dr. Reed recommends bed rest, maybe you should follow her orders." "It's just until the baby is born." Rosalie's eyes brimmed with tears of frustration. She glanced at Clara, who stood quietly behind Adrian, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She seemed so certain of her control, certain that no one would believe Rosalie over her. And so, bed rest began, Clara's perfect solution to keep Rosalie isolated. Each day, Rosalie stayed in a lavish bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's gardens. She was surrounded by luxury, yet she felt imprisoned. Clara would periodically visit, instructing the staff to bring special supplements and teas. Rosalie was skeptical of anything Clara offered, so she took to tossing them out discreetly whenever possible. She was fearful of repeating that strange bitterness she'd tasted once before. On one stifling afternoon, Maria Lopez snuck into Rosalie's room, carrying a tray of fresh fruit. Locking the door behind her, she handed Rosalie a folded piece of paper. "It's from your old doctor," Maria whispered. "I reached out to him, told him about your situation." Trembling, Rosalie opened the note. It was a simple message. "If you need a second opinion, I'm here. Let me help." Relief and gratitude flooded her. She and Maria quickly devised a plan. Maria would help her slip out to see her old doctor in the cover of night, away from Clara's prying eyes. However, unbeknownst to both of them, one of Clara's loyal staff members had been spying on Maria's movements. That night, as Rosalie prepared to sneak out of the estate through a side entrance, she found Clara waiting in the darkened hallway. The older woman's face was a mask of icy rage. "Where do you think you're going?" Clara demanded. Rosalie stood her ground, arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. "I'm going to see my real doctor, the one who listens to me instead of you." Clara's eyes narrowed, and for the first time Rosalie saw a flicker of genuine menace. "You will not leave this house," Clara hissed, "not when you're putting my grandchild at risk with your foolish obstinacy." Fear battled defiance in Rosalie's heart. "It's my child," she snapped, "not yours to control." The words hung in the air, charged with tension. For a moment, it seemed Clara might physically block Rosalie's path. But footsteps echoed from the far corridor. Adrian's footsteps. He emerged to find them both locked in confrontation. "What's going on here?" he demanded, eyes moving from his mother's contorted expression to Rosalie's trembling form. Rosalie spoke first, voice quavering. "Your mother is preventing me from seeing my doctor. Adrian, please, you have to see what she's doing." Clara, tears suddenly welling in her eyes, turned to Adrian with a wounded look. "I'm trying to protect her, Adrian. She wanted to leave in the middle of the night. Anything could happen." Adrian looked torn, but the bone-deep exhaustion in his gaze suggested he was ready to side with Clara yet again. "Rosalie, I understand you're frustrated, but Dr. Reed is highly respected." Rosalie could feel the walls closing in. She turned away, tears streaming down her cheeks as Adrian led her back to her bedroom. The door closed, and she heard Clara's hushed voice lecturing Adrian in the hallway. Though she couldn't make out the words, she felt the weight of Clara's manipulative presence. Later, alone in her bed, Rosalie wept quietly. She was caught in Clara's net, and Adrian, her lifeline, was drifting further away with each calculated lie Clara wove. And somewhere deep inside, the baby stirred, a small sign of life that spurred Rosalie's resolve to fight, no matter how grim the odds seemed. As the weeks dragged on, Rosalie's isolation grew more suffocating. Adrian was bogged down with corporate meetings on the estate itself now. He had converted one of the grand rooms into a makeshift office to oversee critical negotiations. He was physically close, but emotionally distant, caught between his pregnant wife's distress and his mother's manipulative pleas. One afternoon, as Rosalie lay on her canopied bed, feeling the oppressive silence of her gilded cage, a quiet knock rattled her from her thoughts. Expecting Maria, she was surprised to see William Harrington, Adrian's father, slip into the room. He was a tall man with a weary, time-worn face. Rosalie had only met him a handful of times. He lived primarily abroad, having left Clara years ago under strained circumstances that no one in the family fully discussed. "You shouldn't be here," Rosalie muttered, panic rising. "Clara might—" William held up a hand. "Let me worry about Clara. I came to see you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He walked over to a nearby chair and sat down, observing her closely. "You don't look well, child." Rosalie couldn't hold back her tears. The words tumbled out of her, recounting everything. Clara's orchestrated isolation, the forced bed rest, the cancelled charity event, Dr. Reed's complicity, and Adrian's confusion. William listened quietly, his face growing darker with each passing revelation. "Clara has always been controlling," William said at last, choosing his words carefully. "When Michael died, it nearly broke her, but she refused any help. She channeled her grief into obsession over Adrian, over the Harrington legacy. It's why I left. I couldn't be part of that toxic environment anymore." He paused, as though weighing how much to reveal. "I regret leaving Adrian behind, but Clara had all the resources and the power of the Harrington estate. I was just an heir by marriage, not by blood. My stepping away was meant to shield him from our constant battles." Rosalie listened, heart pounding. "William, I'm scared for my baby," she admitted. "I don't know what Clara is truly capable of. And Adrian, he's too torn to see what's happening." William nodded gravely. "Adrian's always been her golden child. She's manipulated him his entire life. We need to be strategic if we're to free him and you from her grasp." Trust me, I have some influence left in this family's affairs." That day, William and Rosalie formed a desperate alliance. He promised to arrange for a neutral doctor's opinion, someone not tied to Clara's social circle. Meanwhile, Rosalie would gather any evidence she could, small details, any suspicious behavior or underhanded orders Clara gave to the staff. William believed that if they could present undeniable proof of Clara's machinations, Adrian might finally see the light. Their plan began to take shape. Under the pretext of wanting to discuss business, William convinced Clara he needed to stay at the estate for a few days. Clara's distrust was palpable, but William's share in the Harrington shipping line gave him enough leverage to insist. He brought in a friend from overseas, a man named Dr. Charles Lindemann, an old colleague with a reputable practice in Germany, to evaluate Rosalie's condition. Clara was livid when she discovered the scheme, but William quelled her protests by insisting it was merely a second opinion to confirm Dr. Reed's diagnosis. Adrian, weary of the family drama, acquiesced. "Let's just see what the good doctor says," he said, sounding tired, as if longing for some resolution. When Dr. Lindemann examined Rosalie, he found nothing alarming to justify strict bed rest. "With proper care, gentle exercise and healthy nutrition, Mrs. Harrington can move about freely," he reported, adding pointedly, "Stress is the real concern here." The next morning, William confronted Clara and Adrian together with Dr. Lindemann's findings. "Your mother forced Rosalie into bed rest without medical necessity," William stated to Adrian. "Why, Clara? Why isolate her like this?" Clara's face was an unreadable mask. She claimed to have acted on expert medical advice. After all, Dr. Reed was widely respected. Adrian looked between his parents, torn. Rosalie stood nearby, her heart pounding. The moment felt like it could change everything. If Adrian sided with William, maybe Clara's stranglehold on the household would finally loosen. But Clara played her trump card. She broke down in tears, genuine or otherwise, lamenting Michael's death and her inability to bear another tragedy. She spoke of nightmares, of waking up drenched in sweat, terrified that Rosalie's baby would suffer the same fate. Her words, dripping with anguish, were enough to fracture William's argument. Adrian's resolve wavered. In the end, Adrian decided to keep both Dr. Reed and Dr. Lindemann on call, insisting that Rosalie follow a more moderate regimen. It was a compromise that left Rosalie feeling half victorious, half defeated. Clara's manipulations still loomed large, but now Rosalie at least had William's support, a flicker of hope in the mansion's dim corridors. As William left Rosalie's room, he squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We've started, but Clara isn't one to back down easily. Be ready." Rosalie nodded, steeling herself. She was in too deep to turn back, and with every passing day, her baby's due date drew closer. She braced for the final battle that she sensed was coming, a confrontation that would either shatter Clara's hold over the family or break Rosalie entirely. Despite Dr. Lindemann's recommendation for a more balanced approach, Clara refused to concede defeat. She doubled down on passive-aggressive remarks, questioning Rosalie's every move. She insisted the staff record Rosalie's daily meals, water intake, and sleep hours, creating a log under the pretense of monitoring the health of the heir. Adrian, overwhelmed by business deals and family tensions, seldom had the energy to challenge her. Weeks turned into days before Rosalie's due date. The mansion buzzed with an undercurrent of apprehension. Even the staff, who had once been reticent to choose sides, now muttered about Clara's increasingly erratic behavior. One evening, Maria Lopez confided in Rosalie that she overheard Clara on the phone with Dr. Reed, pressing for a scheduled C-section against Rosalie's will. "Why does she want that?" Rosalie asked, stomach sinking. Maria shrugged. "She said something about ensuring a controlled environment. That's all I caught before she noticed me." Rosalie felt panic rise. A forced early delivery, orchestrated by Clara and Dr. Reed, could jeopardize her health and her baby's. She needed to act fast. That night, she discussed her fears with William in hushed tones. The older man's face hardened. "We need Adrian to see how Clara and Dr. Reed are collaborating," he said. "Without his intervention, they may try to coerce you into that operation anyway." The next day, an opportunity arose. Adrian arranged for a final prenatal examination at the mansion, bringing both Dr. Reed and Dr. Lindemann. Clara stood by, arms crossed, face impassive. While the doctors examined Rosalie, William discreetly recorded the conversation on his phone. Dr. Reed recited a list of potential complications, advocating a C-section in alarmist terms. Dr. Lindemann calmly refuted each point, asserting that Rosalie's vitals were strong, the baby well positioned, and there was no immediate risk. Citing medical studies, he insisted that a natural birth remained the safest option unless complications arose. Frustrated by the contradiction, Dr. Reed stepped away with Clara to the far corner of the room. In hushed voices, but not entirely out of earshot, Dr. Reed insisted, "This is your grandchild, Mrs. Harrington. If we do this naturally, there are too many unknowns." Clara nodded emphatically. "Exactly. We can't chance it." William caught enough of their exchange on the recording. The tension in the room was palpable. Adrian, looking haggard, finally demanded clarity. "All I want is the best for my wife and child," he said, his voice cracking. "If Dr. Lindemann sees no evidence of risk, then why push a C-section?" Dr. Reed's face tightened. "I'm merely presenting an option. A C-section is standard procedure in many high-profile cases, especially with older mothers." "I'm not an older mother," Rosalie interjected, her voice trembling with anger, "and you haven't given me a valid medical reason for this. I want the chance to give birth naturally if my body allows it." A thick silence followed. Clara glowered, but before she could speak, William played the partial recording he had captured. It echoed with Dr. Reed's fear-mongering and Clara's unwavering insistence on control. Adrian's eyes widened in shock, the scales finally tipping. "Mother, what is this?" he whispered, voice full of betrayal. Clara tried to backtrack, claiming it was out of love, out of fear, but Adrian's face darkened. "I can't believe you would do this behind our backs." Dr. Reed, caught in the crossfire, stammered excuses. "I never meant to override the patient's will." Adrian cut her off. "I want you off this case, effective immediately." Dr. Reed's mouth gaped, but one look at Adrian's fierce expression told her there was no recourse. She quickly gathered her things and departed. Clara stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "Adrian, darling, don't do this. I only wanted—" But Adrian raised a shaking hand. "Don't. You lied to me. You manipulated Rosalie. I think it's best if you stay out of our affairs until the baby is born." Rosalie felt an overwhelming surge of relief mingled with heartbreak. Finally, Adrian was confronting Clara. Yet the pain in his voice was unmistakable. Clara had shaped his entire life, and now he stood at odds with her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Adrian just shook his head. "You've done enough," he said softly, leading Rosalie out of the room. William lingered behind. He looked at Clara with a mixture of pity and resolve. "You've lost, Clara," he said quietly, then followed his son. Left alone, Clara's face twisted with rage and sorrow. She sank into a chair, wringing her hands. She had been on the verge of controlling every detail of this child's birth, of ensuring no possibility of heartbreak or unforeseen tragedy. And now, in an instant, her carefully woven tapestry of control had begun to unravel. Outside the door, Rosalie and Adrian embraced. For the first time in months, Rosalie felt a semblance of safety. Adrian whispered, "I'm so sorry, Rosie. I should have believed you sooner." She clutched him tightly, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "We'll be okay," she whispered, unaware that Clara's final desperate act was still to come. The night Rosalie went into labor was stormy, rain lashing against the mansion's windows. Despite the tension swirling in the household, Adrian had set up a cozy makeshift delivery suite in their private quarters, complete with soothing music and soft lighting. Dr. Lindemann was on call, ready to oversee the birth. As Rosalie's contractions intensified, Adrian stayed by her side, coaching her through each wave of pain. William paced the hallway, checking occasionally to ensure all was going smoothly. The staff, many of whom had grown fond of Rosalie, lit candles in the estate's small chapel, praying for a safe delivery. Clara's presence weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Since Adrian's confrontation, she'd kept to her private rooms, uncharacteristically silent. But as Rosalie's labor progressed, she appeared in the hallway, eyes rimmed with worry and guilt. She stood at the threshold, watching her son cradle Rosalie's hand through her contractions. She seemed to wrestle with conflicting emotions, maternal protectiveness warring with her need for control. When Dr. Lindemann announced that Rosalie was fully dilated and ready to push, Clara hesitantly approached. Adrian shot her a wary glance, but Rosalie, exhausted and in pain, found it in her heart to whisper, "Let her stay." She wanted her child to be born into a family, however fractured. Adrian nodded reluctantly, and Clara stepped inside, lingering at the edge of the room. Rosalie bore down, sweat beading on her forehead. Pain tore through her, but she clung to Adrian's hand, focusing on the promise of new life. The storm raged outside, thunder echoing in the distance. Time blurred in a whirlwind of labored breathing, shouted encouragement, and the intense pressure of childbirth. Finally, a wail broke through the silence. A tiny baby girl entered the world, pink-faced and screaming with life. Dr. Lindemann quickly cleaned and swaddled her before placing her gently into Rosalie's arms. Adrian's face shone with tears as he caressed his daughter's cheek. Rosalie wept openly, love flooding every cell of her being. Behind them, Clara stood frozen. Her eyes, locked on the newborn, brimmed with tears that teetered between joy and sorrow. Carefully, as though afraid of rejection, she stepped forward. Rosalie caught the movement and, with trembling arms, extended the baby toward her. Clara's breath hitched. For a long moment she stared at her granddaughter, her lips quivering with unspoken emotion. Adrian looked at his mother uncertainly. Part of him was still furious at her manipulations, yet he couldn't deny the genuine heartbreak etched on her face. Clara reached out with tentative hands, and Rosalie gently placed the baby in them. "What's her name?" Clara asked, voice trembling. "Penelope Clara Harrington," Rosalie said softly, meeting Clara's eyes. It was a deliberate choice, one she hoped might bridge the chasms of hurt between them. Clara's face registered shock, followed by a release of tears she'd held back for years. She sank into a chair, holding the baby as though cradling the most precious treasure on earth. In that moment, something in Clara cracked open. Memories of Michael, sorrow for her past actions, and a desperate longing for redemption seemed to collide in her eyes. "She's beautiful," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Adrian placed an arm around Rosalie, relief washing over him. A fragile peace settled in the room, illuminated by the gentle glow of a new beginning. Over the following weeks, the Harrington estate slowly began to heal. Clara's transformation wasn't instantaneous, but she made visible efforts, apologizing to Rosalie, stepping back from constant oversight, and seeking help for her lingering grief over Michael. She would never be the warm, doting mother-in-law Rosalie had dreamed of, but the hostility that once simmered between them lessened under the shared love for baby Penelope. William returned to Europe, satisfied that Adrian and Rosalie, with their new family, were on a path to mending old rifts. Dr. Lindemann departed, leaving clear instructions for postpartum care, along with a gentle admonition for Clara to let Rosalie recover on her own terms. As Rosalie sat on the estate's balcony one sunny afternoon, holding Penelope and watching Adrian work in the rose garden below, she couldn't help but reflect on her tumultuous journey. She had faced isolation, distrust, and heartbreak, but through her perseverance, and with help from unexpected allies, love had triumphed over cruelty. The scars were still there, but they shaped a stronger family, one that looked to the future with cautious hope. Sometimes Rosalie thought about the moment she first told Clara about her pregnancy, only to be met with an icy stare. She realized how far they'd come, and though she would never forget the pain, she also wouldn't let it define her. She vowed to raise Penelope in a home full of warmth and honesty, where secrets would find little room to grow. She hoped Clara might find peace in grandmotherhood, healing from the wounds that had driven her to such desperate extremes. If ever Rosalie doubted her strength, she only had to look at her daughter's eyes, a perfect mix of her parents'. In that gaze, she saw the promise of a love that could overcome any darkness, proof that even in the face of torment, hope and resilience could guide her toward a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for accompanying Rosalie on her heart-wrenching journey, from a blissful newlywed to a terrified mother-in-waiting, and ultimately to a stronger, more confident woman at peace with her place in the Harrington household. We've witnessed how family conflicts and secret agendas can threaten to pull a couple apart, yet love, perseverance, and the miracle of new life can bridge the deepest divides. Now that Rosalie, Adrian, and baby Penelope have found their way through the storm, what lies ahead for them will surely be a mix of challenges and triumphs. But one thing is certain, they have learned that true love outlasts even the darkest manipulations. If you found this story gripping and inspiring, please like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. And don't forget to leave a comment on how you felt throughout Rosalie's journey. Your engagement means the world to us.